Welcome to the CSPC 2023 interview series. My name is Kathy, and I'm one of the volunteers. Today, I am pleased to be speaking with Dr. Gail Murphy, the Vice President of Research and Innovation at the University of British Columbia. She is also a professor in the Department of Computer Science, as well as the co-founder of TaskTop Technologies. Welcome, Dr. Murphy.
Thanks a lot, Kathy. It's great to be here at the conference.
Yeah, thank you for being here. All right, jumping right into the questions. A common theme underlying many of the strategies in UBC's strategic plan for research and innovation is knowledge sharing, whether through collaborations or through translating research into action. In what ways, in your opinion, does knowledge sharing foster innovation?
Well, thanks for the question. At UBC, we've been looking at 4 different pathways to help move more of our research insights, discoveries, and knowledge into socioeconomic impact. So one of the pathways that we have been looking at is partnerships. How do we form more partnerships with not-for-profits, for-profit companies, and be able to have researchers work alongside partners to be able to tackle problems of mutual interest, and in that way, do more knowledge sharing. 2 of the other paths we've been looking at are really more about the commercialization of research discoveries. So we do that in 2 ways, both through licensing and patenting, and also through entrepreneurship support. So an example of that would be AbCellera, which during the COVID-19 pandemic really came to the forefront of providing antibody therapeutics for trying to make better COVID-19 symptoms for various individuals. And since that time, they've become a $1 billion capitalized company that's really growing in Vancouver. So really pretty exciting in about 10 years to see their early research results move through that kind of impact in the community and to Canada and to worldwide. And then the 4th kind of pathway that we look at is knowledge exchange. So how do we make the knowledge that our researchers are involved with more accessible to the public, more accessible to each other, and more accessible to the community at large? And that really comes to researchers learning from other researchers. So we've been very lucky to have some of our Indigenous scholars, for instance, share ways to be able to understand how we can move Indigenous knowledge about the Earth through our earth sciences research that's not only Indigenous, but done in perhaps more traditional ways. So through those 4 pathways, we're really looking at different ways to provide that means of moving research into impact in perhaps a shorter time frame.
Those are some fantastic initiatives. Thank you for sharing them. They're especially crucial in this time where a lot of the research institutions in Canada, specifically university institutions, are often critiqued for not being able to explain the benefits of research very well. Do you agree with this critique? And if so, how does the narrative need to change to better convey the importance of having a globally competitive research sector?
Well, it certainly is a challenge. I think for all of us that are involved in some sort of research, it sometimes feels just apparent to us how whatever we're doing could really make a significant difference, but it's not always the best way that we go about communicating that kind of insight. And when we think about the research ecosystem in Canada, we really have 2 main outputs. Our first output is people, right? The talented individuals that are involved in research as undergraduates or do graduate studies that involve research or go on to be postdoctoral fellows. And those individuals, they find a number of ways outside of the institution that they were involved with. They might further their career in academia. Maybe they'll eventually become faculty members or research scientists involved in the research ecosystem in Canada. Other individuals will go out and start a company, right? I've had the good fortune to have a number of my students go and do that within the Canadian ecosystem. And yet other students go to work for companies within Canada or not-for-profits. And in those ways, they take all of the critical knowledge that they've gained, their critical thinking skills, their communication skills, their ability to delve into a problem and start taking it apart and making progress. They take that into the organizations they join. And I think that's really critical for Canada. As we know, there's a productivity problem in Canadian industry that's well documented. It gets talked about in the media quite a bit. How do we make sure that the talented individuals that we're training can go into Canadian industry and help make the Canadian economy more productive, which we know is critical for future Canadians. The second kind of main output that we have is really those discoveries that I talked about before. But sometimes it takes years for the insight somebody had to really find its way into a form that can be available when we need it. We're all pretty aware of the insights that happen in artificial intelligence in Canada and how many years it took from thinking about neural networks to seeing them today in generative AI. Another story from UBC would be about lipid nanoparticles. So Professor Peter Cullis, he researched lipid nanoparticles, or LNP, for 40 years. He created a number of companies along the way to be able to understand how that mechanism could be used to deliver drugs to individuals, and he had a number of successes. But it was because it had been developed that at the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, it was ready for mRNA vaccines to be the delivery agent to make it into the human body. And it was through that partnership, through partnerships with companies that were working with Pfizer and others, that the mRNA vaccines really made their way into billions of doses that have changed our ability as humankind to deal with the pandemic. But that's not a story you could have told 39 years ago, or 38 years ago, or 20 years ago. And so sometimes that long period makes it really hard to describe the impacts of research. So we have many of those kinds of insights through Canadian research ecosystem waiting to happen, but they might not happen until 2050. When they do come to fruition, they're going to change the world.
Thank you for sharing those very impactful and important stories, talking about how research is not necessarily immediate impact, but starts with a discovery and can grow to world-changing things. I wanted to pick your brain a bit more about what you mentioned regarding partnerships. I was wondering what are some recommendations you'd give to researchers at UBC looking to partner with communities? What are some things they should be aware of, and vice versa? What would you give to advice would you give to communities looking to partner with researchers?
Well, a really important question. And those communities are not only in Canada, right? They're worldwide. Because of course, the problems that we're facing are really problems about the globe, problems about societies in general. And so we can learn a lot from our local communities, but we can also learn a lot from communities around the globe. So we have a number of supports we put in place at UBC to help with the partnering, to help forge those introductions, to help people understand how they can speak about their work in a way that's accessible to communities, but also reminding our research community that we can learn so much by listening, listening to community problems, trying to understand how the ways that we're approaching those problems, maybe in the lab or maybe within small group settings, how would they work within community? We have one really in that community. And they've had some real successes in improving the access to clean water in a number of communities, Indigenous and others within Canada. But it takes that investment of time. It takes that investment of understanding as a researcher that you don't know everything. And you can really learn from the expertise that is around you. So I think it's that engagement, right? That's not just about telling people. It's about listening, it's about learning, and it's about bringing multiple partners together to try to attack really important problems.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think it's just so important. And it's so heartening to see that listening to communities and understanding that each communities are individual hubs of knowledge that we can exchange with as researchers is just so important. I'm glad to see it coming to the forefront. So now changing tracks a little bit. So you wear many different hats. You're in an administrative position as the VPRI. You're also a professor, a faculty member, as well as a startup founder. So across all of your roles, how has your perspective on all of these topics, whether it's innovation, knowledge sharing, science and innovation, how has all of those things changed over the times that you've been in these roles?
Oh, well, great question. Not an easy one to really answer, but let me give it a try. I have had a lot of roles. I've been a software developer, I've been a graduate student, I've founded a company, I've been a professor, I'm now doing more administration. And I think you learn, different aspects about research and innovation and how we can maybe do it better in each of those roles. So let me talk about just two of them, maybe a little bit. As a co-founder of a company that grew to about 200 people within Canada, it's still active. It's an enterprise software company, so provides solutions to make it easier to develop software for the largest companies in the world. And we grew from our laboratory, from an open source laboratory project, into being a provider to automotive companies, to healthcare, to banks. And what we learned along the way was really about the number of different kinds of roles it takes to really move something from the laboratory into being a true product. It's not just about the technical know-how. It's about starting to understand, what does your customer really need? How can your product change, iterate, be refined, grow new products? And then how do you actually tell the world about that in a way that they can understand? Because the research language we might use is not necessarily directed upon the problems that people are looking to solve. And if I think about our evolution over the 15 plus years that I was involved, two things really come to mind. It's patience and perseverance. And those are actually traits that most scientists kind of have at their core. It took a lot of patience. It wasn't a 1 year kind of came out of the garage and suddenly we had an amazing software product. It was really about this iterative refinement, thinking about how could we make our software products easier to install? How do we make them more scalable to the customers we were dealing with? And it was about perseverance, because it's not easy to sell internationally, and it's not easy to sell into large companies as a small provider. So it was really about persevering and bringing on other people that could add more skills to our initial core group. So definitely learned a lot through that experience. As a research administrator, one of the joys is just the breadth of research that is done at our institutions, whether it's insights into new ways to do creative and performing arts, whether it's the social sciences that give us insights into society, the new technologies that are going to change the way that we communicate or we interact. There's just such a breadth on our university campuses in Canada that you learn something every moment of the day, and that is a true joy. But you also see the challenges. Right now in this country, we are facing a crisis in how we fund graduate students and postdoctoral fellows. This is the core of our research capabilities in this country. And we need to pay more attention of how do we make sure that they can use their creative energies to build the Canada of the future. We also know there's problems in making sure that if we have lots of infrastructure, how do we get the operating funding to be able to make sure people can do projects that are effective? And I could go on through the problems, but what's heartening is the community, through conferences like this, we're talking about them. We're thinking about solutions that we could bring that bring government, industry, academic institutions together to say, how do we make sure that Canada has a research footprint that continues to punch above its weight, to use that metaphor, because we're really well known on the international stage, but we need to work together to come up with solutions for these challenges to make sure Canada has the solutions for the problems that we face around us.
Yeah, those are very important points that you brought up, spanning a whole range of different topics, sort of mirroring how you have a whole range of different roles where you are clearly very much enjoying, and I really admire your sense of optimism towards our landscape. Dick, one last question for you.
Okay.
And this is related to the conference, something we ask all of our interviewees. What is your opinion on the value of the Canadian Science Policy Centre and its position in the community for convening, connecting, and capacity building in the science and policy landscape?
Well, great question. I think, Canada is, as we know, a geographically large country. And, speaking as somebody from the West Coast who often has to make my way across the country, it is a really large country. And we have a lot of different regional issues that we have to deal with across the country. We're seeing some of those, unfortunately, with climate change be more apparent across our country. For instance, wildfires, which is something that has affected BC for many years. We're seeing it, unfortunately, affect Ontario, Quebec, the Maritimes, more often the prairies than we've seen before. So we really need a way for us to bring together our regional strengths, as well as understand how we can work as a federated community together to attack many of these kinds of problems with an evidence-based, science-based approach. In order to do that, we need to convene. But it's not easy to convene because we're all very focused on our own issues and working together. So conferences, the CSPC has an ability to bring together the federal government, regional governments, industry, academics, people working in major science facilities to be able to talk about the common problems that we share and do this brainstorming that I referred to, right? How do we come up with new approaches? Because clearly, if we have challenges, we have to come up with creative new ways that work for 2023 and beyond and can't just rely on the old mechanisms. So that convening is really important to make sure that we're collaborating, we're sharing insights and knowledge, but also coming up with new approaches.
Yeah, thank you for your response. This is my first time at CSPC and my first time as a volunteer, and it's truly been very formative for me as a grad student to, just as you said, see people from all different sectors all across this gigantic country come together in one place. So thank you for your time today. Would you like to share any last words?
Well, just thank you for volunteering and making this possible.